Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to the DataOps Industry Panel of the DataOps Summit 2022. I am Chitrita Chakravarti, and I am a data strategist and architect at Slalom, working at the intersection of data engineering and data ops. I'm also a community ambassador for the CD Foundation. And my belief is DataOps as a discipline is going to fuel the data and analytics vision for this decade, and it will be every data organization's path towards the North Star. DataOps, in my opinion, enables enterprises across industries to infuse predictability in the data delivery process, ensuring that data is delivered in an agile and an assured fashion over the data engineering pumps and pipes and the processes. With this, I welcome our panelists to the discussion, bringing DataOps to industries. I'm looking forward to an interesting and engaging session today, which will augment our understanding of how DataOps can be brought to the forefront across industries. I'm joined today by industry experts who have implemented DataOps in various industry practices, by product experts who've addressed customer challenges through DataOps, and by startup founders leading boutique consulting in data and analytics space. Thank you, everyone, for coming together today to share your thoughts, and I feel honored to be able to moderate this panel. To kick off things, let us start with a brief introduction of each one of you. That'll help our audience get a sense of what industries you've enabled via DataOps. If all agree, we can use a popcorn approach where I call out someone to introduce themselves, and then you can choose the next person to carry the introduction torch further. Once everybody has introduced themselves, I will jump in with our warm-up question. So at this point, I will call out Ajay to introduce himself. And Ajay, after you've introduced yourself, you can call out another person to introduce.
Sure. I'll just go by the names as I'm seeing the order on my screen, so I'll take that approach. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. And to introduce myself, my name is Ajay Raina, and I lead the data modernization practice within Cognizant for the life sciences industry. So pretty much take a frontline role in helping carve out data modernization journeys for all our clients, whether it's legacy migration to the cloud or whether it's repurposing, reengineering some of the existing constructs to more of next gen architectures, and definitely as Cognizant, we see data ops as a very, very strong enabling lever in enabling that paradigm shift. It's not just about moving your bases to a digitally transformed and enabling delivery at the speed of business capability, but it's also important to sustain that on an ongoing basis with continuous value delivery, and that's where we have data ops as a very strong enabling lever as a part of our data modernization suite of offerings. So very excited to be as a part of this discussion. So having said that, I'll pass the baton to Steve Hoover to introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm Steve Huber. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for DataOps. We're the creators of dataops.live. I've been in the data and analytics space for more than 3 decades, largely working with early stage technology companies and running and building go-to-market. In terms of our view of data ops, we try to take a bit of a holistic view of data ops, but our view is very specific right now to the Snowflake environment. So, I think one of the interesting things we'll all discuss today about data ops is what it is, because I think many organizations view it and discuss it in various different ways. Our view of data ops is really to focus on bringing automation, orchestration, observability, and automated CI/CD to the entire process of how you develop, test, and deploy data products and data applications, for us specifically in the Snowflake ecosystem. So that is a bit about me and my company. And Michael, I'll pass it over to you for an introduction.
Thanks so much, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Hutnian. I'm responsible for sales and global partnerships here at Data Kitchen. And we are a dataops software provider. And our beliefs are very similar to what Steve mentioned earlier. We believe, as we'll discuss, I think, in a few moments, that analytic teams should be able to deliver analytic systems faster than they do today, with higher quality than they do today. And that the key to doing that is adopting dataops principles. And here at Data Kitchen, we've been educating the industry and bringing the ideas of dataops to the market for 5 or 6 years now. We're the authors of the Dataops Manifesto. And it's our belief that regardless of the tool chain that a team might choose, whether it's Snowflake or Redshift or Informatica or any other tool chain, that they should be able to apply dataops principles across that tool chain. And our software allows the adoption of these principles rapidly. And we're excited about talking about dataops whenever we can. And I'm excited about addressing the questions that Chitrita has in the offering for us. So thanks very much for having me.
And Mike, you choose?
I'll choose Costas.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be among professionals who are interested about dataops. So the past year and a half, I'm working as the chief of staff to the VP of sales, pre-sales, and customer success for Tanzu Data at VMware. But I have a background for about 20 years. I've been working with businesses, helping design, building, and operating large-scale analytic systems. So back in the past, as a technical professional, and today, my life, my day-to-day life is all about people, processes, systems, and how we can take the things that we do every day, figure out the parts that can be optimized, and taking this time, some time, to take one step back and say, hey, what are we doing here? How we can change it? How we can bring more value? So I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. I believe we have Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Chitrita. I'll be really brief since Steve did such a fantastic introduction of dataops.live, but I'm Vice President of Evangelism and Enablement here at dataops.live. Started my career as a software engineer, so going from old school to object-oriented software engineering methodologies to DevOps to dataops was pretty much charted for me, so it's great to be here. I'm glad to be speaking with you guys today about this. And I think that's it, right?
That is about it. Thank you so much for the introduction. We will now dive into the main conversation, and here comes a warm-up question. So we have often heard two schools of thoughts about dataops. DataOps is DevOps for data, is what some people say. And then there's another school of thought where people say DataOps is not just DevOps for data, it is a lot more. My first question to all of you, and we will start with hearing from Mike, is what is the key difference between DevOps and DataOps? Mike, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Chitrita. I think it's an excellent question. And we've written a blog on the subject, actually, and it remains our most popular blog because it is a very common question. And the reason that we've tried to bring this idea of DataOps to the marketplace is because while DevOps is very powerful for software engineering teams, the products of a data team are different, and the requirements for automation and quality are likewise different. So the biggest difference that we see is that when a data and analytic team or a data science team is building a pipeline or a series of pipelines or a data product, the requirements for success of that data product differ from a software product. One of the key areas of difference is when an analytic system is put into production, there has to be a way to monitor that system in production because data is always changing as it flows through a production system. So the idea of ensuring quality of a production system is foreign to software engineering teams. Software engineering teams or DevOps teams, they're concerned with testing and development and promoting code quickly, as they should be. to put a software product into production. But their expectations and concern really end there. Not so for a data and analytic team or a data science team. A data science or an analytic team have to be concerned with two pipelines. One is the production pipeline and ensuring that that's working, and also in ensuring that changes to a production pipeline can be happening quickly. So the requirements are just different. And we specialize here at Data Kitchen in helping data and analytic teams across their chosen tool chains to worry about both pipelines, both production and development. So from our perspective, that's one of the key differences. And I'd be very interested in hearing what the other panelists think.
So Steve, Costas, Patrick, Ajay, we'd like to hear your perspective. Mike brought about a very important point of discussion, which is orchestration and monitoring across the production pipelines is quite important. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I would sort of echo some of the sentiment that Mike outlined in his review of that subject. I think ultimately the interesting thing that I think is happening in this data ops space is that companies that touch data ops from different perspectives have their own way of positioning and explaining it and trying to illustrate their value. Our perspective at data ops is to how do you lifecycle manage the entire process, everything from how you set up your environment management in Snowflake, as an example, with your policies and your permissions and all the different environments that you'd have, through being able to automate the orchestration of all the third-party technologies that companies are using at the data fabric layer in order to bring them speed and agility and observability, to be able to provide strong automated testing in that process so that the trust of that data is there, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to continue running a data pipeline if we know there's bad quality data going in, right? And then ultimately being able to improve the governance of that data, tracking all of the lineage and metadata that occurs in that process. So, our view, because our founder is quite interesting, our CEO came from a very strong background in the data space, and our CTO came from a very strong background in the software development space, right? So there's this sort of convergence of perspective in how our company was formed and how our platform was built and delivered, that we take this very strong lifecycle management perspective, really being able to focus on helping organizations with the develop, build, test, deploy, and manage the lifecycle of the data products and applications that they would provide. And so that's the perspective that we have. But I think the other thing that's starting to come into play in some use cases is that there's lots of custom software that also has to be orchestrated by data ops, right? People are building things in Java, Scala, Python, R. And so being able to incorporate that into the sphere of what you bring automation to is important. And that's one of the things that we concentrate on as well here at DataOps with dataops.live.
Yeah, I'll open it up to Ajay, Patrick, Costas.
Yeah.
We've heard lifecycle management. We've heard other things. Let's
Yeah.
go.
I think, I'll take an architect's view here. So if we look at conventionally how data foundations have been built over the years, we had, data warehouses and, data marts, and then came the world of big data, which kind of disrupted the paradigm quite a bit before the cloud technologies also matured. And the main thing is the big thing that we were always challenged as system integrators is how do we differentiate ourselves in the time to value. I think that's always been the challenge that we have all been grappling throughout the years. And typically most of these data foundation projects were always considered to be very lengthy, time consuming. And then kind of came Mr. Agile, where, which somehow didn't seem to mix well with, the data management paradigm. So what, and then of course came practices like DevOps, which kind of, but still, I think the convergence didn't quite happen. What I think the ultimate, when I talk about my journey about evolving myself into these specific practices, the main thing was data management technologies hadn't quite matured to that level of agility, providing that speed and scale. Even if you look at it, at the end of the day, you're ingesting the data, you're curating, harmonizing the data, and you're making it consumable for insight. So there are essentially these three parts of the pipeline that you have to orchestrate in this. So as now with some of the latest technologies like data fabric, data mesh, and all of these things, which take a very templatized approach to see, if you have to understand that software engineering is about making things more repeatable, more standardized, more templatized. But those practices had to come on the data side of the world, where you're doing metadata driven ingestion, you're doing more AI ML driven data quality, you're doing more nowadays we are hearing about intelligent data management, intelligent data integration. And when it comes to insights, now we are talking about auto ML and all these other things which are accelerating. Bottom line is it's slowly forming the path of an assembly line where I think, but here's the key thing here. You have to combine modern data engineering practices, because I look at it as two parts of the two pipes that have to orchestrate seamlessly. Your modern data engineering practices, where you're really applying modern data engineering approaches, and more templatized, more of like templatized approach, more of AI ML driven approach, which bring that speed and scale to delivery of that. That's one part of it. DevOps comes in where it, with its continuous, where it integrates with your GitHubs, your Jenkins, and all the bamboos of the world to ensure it gives that acceleration to those, your data engineering and analytic user stories. So if you kind of, if you ask me how do I explain that in one line, the ability to deliver data engineering and analytics based user stories at speed and scale and velocity. I think that's where I think DataOps plays a very important role. And then of course, observability, monitoring, all these other facets that you weave in from infrastructure as code perspective. So all of that, but unless you don't streamline your data engineering practices to be more modernized, I don't think you're really harnessing the true value of DataOps. So in my mind, it's definitely not DevOps for data. That I completely concur. So I just wanted to give my perspective here.
Thank you, Ajay. Costas, how does it?
I completely agree with everything folks said before. You know, it's interesting when I joined the team that I am today on a different role. Okay, I found myself, and I was coming from a background where working with technologies like Teradata, data warehouses. Hadoop was about to start becoming a thing. All right, and I was privileged enough to be co-located in the London office with the ex-Pivotal Labs folks. And it was mind-blowing, all right? I had never really met software developers in my professional career before. I knew the data guys, the administrators, all those, but software developers, like that was a new thing. And I found myself working with like people who are in the forefront of like agile technologies and all those things. So I had to learn lots of things. The first thing I appropriated from their thinking was the thinking as a product mentality, right? Which us as data people, we are just about starting thinking like. So for me, the biggest difference is like, I feel that DevOps is more tuned towards agility and testing, like was said before, okay? Because this is where the pain point is, like this is where the bias is. Data folks, we have different intents and second order intents. So I believe that we can certainly learn a lot from their processes, okay? but we also have the ability to make them their own. Another thing that I've learned is like figure out in your assembly line, like Ajay said before, okay, which parts are those which you find yourself doing repeatedly again and again and again, and then figure out what value do they bring into your assembly line. And this is where you need to work. This is where you need to automate stuff. Okay.
Great point, Costas. Patrick.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Costas on that focus on the data product. You know, the phrase "begin with the end in mind" I think is really important when you're differentiating between what DevOps does and what DataOps is aspiring to do. And really, you know, it's ironic. I still remember my first, couple jobs as a software engineer. How much time we spent testing, right? And then across those inflection points that Costas mentioned, and also that AJ mentioned around when big data came around and we're going to the cloud, we forget everything we learned, right? All the things we should have done around quality, governance, et cetera. And that testing element is critically absent. So it's really challenging as well because you're dealing with such a dynamic route to get to a data product, right? Whereas in software development, we were developing a thing for a user. Really, really different in terms of how you get to that end. And I think that that's one of the primary distinctions between DevOps and DataOps. But there's certainly great lessons to be learned from that and inspiration to get from that. But yeah, it's definitely not DevOps for data. I think we need to have t-shirts made for that.
That's a wonderful point. We'll definitely do that and come over this bridge again. Thank you, everybody. Great warm-up question. Great discussion. There were very valuable points brought in. So this brings me to another question. And Patrick, I'll start with you here. How are industries adopting DataOps? You may have seen some use cases. If you can speak to some of them, would like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think the organizations that I see doing the most are the ones that have the most to lose, perhaps. So we're talking about organizations in highly regulated industries where they really need not only the time to market as a challenge, where DataOps addresses with developer productivity, but then making sure you've got the governance to back it up. So regulated industries, we're seeing quite a bit of focus there. And then also those that are in kind of the hyper growth, sorts of organizations. One of our customers is called OneWeb, which is doing the low altitude satellites for internet, et cetera, similar to that guy who makes cars. So they have done more because they had to, right? They don't have the time. That's the one commodity that's always in short supply for organizations like that. So they're going to get out a lot. They're going to get a lot out of developer productivity, velocity, and also by focusing on use cases such as data mesh, right? Where we kind of turn things around a little bit and focus on getting the folks on the business side involved in the process, the development, care, and feeding of those data pipelines, which has been noticeably absent for those companies that aren't in the regulated, aren't in the high velocity industries and problem spaces.
Great. Yeah. And Mike, would you like to provide your perspective? I know of your work in the life science, healthcare perspective with Data Kitchen as a product. So please share your light.
Thanks, Rachita. Yeah, I would agree with Patrick. We see a lot of demand for the sort of speed and quality that goes hand in hand with DataOps in regulated industries, because a good, effective automated testing capability like is provided by DataOps and Data Kitchen and other vendors can be critical to demonstrating control over regulated environments. So we see that a lot. But interestingly enough, we see that the problems that DataOps is meant to solve, particularly the idea of identifying errors in systems and proving quality, are really valued across multiple industries. And one of the reasons that is, and I think the factory metaphor we spoke about earlier is really appropriate here. The sheer choice of technologies that analytic and data science teams have today is vast. If you consider the services and products available from AWS or Azure or Google, or even on-premise, or even in a hybrid world, there are hundreds of tools and technologies that can be used to build an analytic system. And one of the other reasons that data ops makes so much sense to so many people across industries is they're all sharing that same complexity. And critical to success is sort of taming that complexity, getting that data factory to work well, and ensuring that all the different pieces and parts, regardless of the technology choices that teams make, are working, doing that effectively in production at speed, and then promoting changes from development into production at speed. It's a very difficult thing to do unless you have some automated help. And we took a survey actually not too long ago, a cross industry survey. And what that told us was that one, that most organizations have errors in production and they don't know where those errors are. And as a result of that, they can't deploy changes quickly. And end users get frustrated and adoption is affected. That's one. Number two, it also suggested that data engineers have a hard job and many of them think they need therapy. And we believe that rather than providing them therapy, providing them some support with data ops and automation and making their jobs easier to do is another way to ensure that data engineers are successful and that these projects end up being successful, which is really the critical part of data ops in our opinion.
Thank you, Mike. Costas, would you like to talk to it?
It's interesting because my company doesn't really work actively in the space. So I find personally myself into situations discussing about data ops, okay, in three different ways. Either those are businesses who have a very strong DevOps culture, okay, and they have reached a maturity level where they say, oh, we need to do something for our data too, but they don't really know, or they may have tried the DevOps kind of thinking in data and failed. Okay, that's the one. The second is with the cloud and the variety and huge variety of as a service choices that we have today. Okay, I find that the curriculum of the people who work on data is slightly different from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. So they do tend to come more from a software background. So they think about DevOps, or they have heard about DevOps, and they found themselves working with data, so they start thinking those questions. And the third is businesses which jump into, we need to do AI and ML, okay, and they found themselves in the situation where I don't understand why do I get those results. Okay, so, and I don't know what my colleagues here feel about if data ops and AI ops is like variation of the same thing or two different things, but they certainly come together. But I also think that they have like, there are differences between those.
Great. Steve?
Sure. So since Patrick sort of covered part of what we see, I'll try to give a slightly different perspective or color on what I see. So, you know, one of the interesting things around trends that we see for adoption, I'll focus a little more on use cases first, is that, you know, because we focus on Snowflake and most of the Snowflake workloads are analytic in nature, right? Sort of new age cloud data warehouse analytic use cases. That's the mainstream of the workload that a lot of new customers are starting with. But then, as Costas mentioned, there's this excitement around advanced analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so there's this graduation of interest that goes there. And then we're also seeing this sort of accelerated interest around building applications on a platform like Snowflake with supporting their whole Powered By initiative. So I think the interesting thing about this, I go back to sort of rewinding to back in time. If we think about what happened in the relational world when data warehousing first was rolled out, you had these database companies and everybody was just trying to put data into a database and then ultimately start do some reporting on it, then more advanced reporting, and then ultimately applications rule the world. And I think we're seeing history repeating itself in this sort of cloud data warehouse environment as well, where many of the early use cases are oriented around analytics, data warehousing type analytics, then more advanced analytics and applications. And I think across the entire board, the wider the utilization of this type of technology, the more automation and observability and orchestration is really required to deliver on that promise. Because we all know that when these use cases go into production, I like to say it's their born date, right? It's not the end, it's the beginning, right? So what we know happens is there's always change, right? There's new feature branches and there's new data sources and there's different tools that different parts of the organization want to use. And if they have a manually cobbled together infrastructure, it becomes very difficult to be agile. It becomes extremely difficult to do automated testing. It becomes extremely difficult to have governance and be able to do things like, how do you roll back if you put something in production and you had a failure first thing in the morning when you put that thing in production at midnight, right? Sends a lot of people scrambling to go fix that. So without having delivering on the promise of what we focus on together in this community around data ops, it's really difficult for organizations to meet that challenge.
Ajay, what's your perspective?
Well, I mean, I handle a lot of the life sciences industry. The maturity, I would say, is still there's something to be desired. To be very honest, what has happened, but I think the good news is that I think especially with the advent of COVID, that really pushed the envelope for a lot of digital transformation initiatives, and people realized that data ops had to be a part of the strategy. Now, I think that's where SIs like us had to kind of bring some kind of frameworks to kind of educate. I mean, it all started with educating them on what data ops could do for them, and and of course, at Cognizant, we have built our, we have partnerships with all the hyperscalers. We have built our own accelerators in AWS and Azure marketplace. So to give clients a hand in accelerating that journey, we did build some of those frameworks. But here's the fundamental, I think it's still in a interesting state right now, because at the end of the day, that understanding and maturity, that what it takes to orchestrate a data ops pipeline, people are trying to solve for more CI/CD level challenges. But to understand that the whole data ops journey takes CI/CD, continuous monitoring with automation, and all of that has to be incrementally achieved over a period of time. I think that it seems to be at times, I think there is receptivity, but when it comes to trying to make that happen, definitely we are seeing some challenges. I think what's imperative is that buy-in has to start from the top. I mean, and of course it has to be meticulously followed through to the ground for execution. But I think one positive note that I'm seeing is that it is definitely becoming one of the important mandates for all the CIOs that we talk to. They definitely look at data ops as one of the things. And the other thing that life sciences is doing is now, instead of giving SIs projects to do, I think they're slowly moving towards a managed services model where build, run, support, everything kind of comes bundled together. So it's not that you're just doing a project, delivering it and handing it over. You're continuously, and definitely the big push that they're making of all the system integrators is how well are you going to bring data ops as a lever to enhance the value delivery, the overall experience of digital transformation. So that's definitely, so I definitely think in the next year or so we should see a huge uptick in terms of adoption there. So life sciences, yes, I mean, we all know that it's typically a laggard in adoption for most of the modernization paradigms, but I think the momentum is definitely swaying in that direction from what I see. And I think that's where all the system integrators and all the vendors will have to really ensure that wherever possible, that acceleration, that orchestration, being ability to provide that speed and scale is kind of enabled for our clients. I think that's. I'm just giving you an SI's view on how we have seen the trend, especially in the last year or so.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there were some very great points that were brought about in this question, and it started me thinking. So here, a spin-off question before each one of you, and let's have a quick 10 seconds, response to that. Do you feel industries choose DataOps to handle their DNA last mile problem? Or is it becoming a first mile kind of an initiative across industry? So Steve, I'll start with you, 10 seconds of that perspective.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we actually see both because we're focused on Snowflake and we work so closely with the Snowflake go-to-market team. I would say from an opportunity perspective, I see a fairly even balance of greenfield opportunities of customers that are embracing data ops from day one to get quick win in their new data cloud environment, to the ones that are brownfield, right, that have many use cases to deliver, and they're running into bottlenecks because of a lack of automation. So we're seeing both from our perspective.
Great perspective. So yes, so Steve agrees it's not a last mile always, it's somewhere in between as well. Patrick, what do you suggest?
Far be it for me to disagree with my CRO, but yeah, I think we're seeing it all, right? And by the same sort of measure, we're also seeing, it's not just huge companies. We're seeing companies of modest size and stuff that are benefiting from this. It's about removing pain. It's about getting that developer productivity so they can do more and get those data products, the right data products to the right people.
Ajay, what about life science and healthcare that you've seen? Go.
I think it's still being treated in the first mile stage. I don't think there's still some time to go before we get into that because of the level of maturity. I think even if we are able to get to a point where we are delivering data engineering stories at speed and scale, I think that extending it to your analytics, your ML and AI I think that's still some time away. So I think I would kind of gravitate to the more of the first mile kind of thing.
Michael, what about you? What have you seen?
I think we're seeing the same that Steve mentioned. We believe in our customers are believing these days that it is both a first mile and a last mile problem. And if you think about it, there are organizational challenges that companies have, because often there's a team that builds the first section of a data analytics system, the first mile, and there could be a separate altogether team building the last mile. And yet what has to be developed and managed and enhanced and updated over time is the combination of those 2 or 3 or 4 different pieces. And our view is that the best way to ensure that that whole analytics system across multiple teams and technologies is working as it should in production and is updated as quickly as it can be in development is to adopt DataOps principles. And our, as you might expect, our software helps to ensure that these teams can work well together, that they can partner, that they can collaborate, because the overall objective, as we've said over and over here again here today, is to ensure that a system that's working in production is working as it should, but that the data teams, the multiple teams across multiple technologies and organizations can update and enhance that system going forward to ensure that end users are happy and that adoption happens. So we think it's both a first and a last mile problem, and I think the industry is starting to recognize that as well.
Great thought, Mike. Costas.
I would agree with Michael and Steve and Patrick. I think it's both the first and last, but the experience is different. Okay, I've seen few first mile challenges and they typically start from the beginning, but they start small, okay? And because there is more awareness, actually calling yourself data ops something is sexy, all right? If you would use that job title like 5 years ago, it would be like, what is this guy doing? Like, okay. But on the other hand, they're like the last mile. And I'm also sure that we are still far from delivering that, like, from data orchestration, blah, 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 to information, value, like actionable analytics. But they have to deal with lots of engineering or data engineering backlog, okay? So it's both, but there are different types of challenges.
All right. And Costas, to that, I love wearing my data ops architect hat always, I definitely feel a lot comfortable and nice about it. Thank you, everyone. It was a spin-off question, but thanks for your perspective. Coming to the, what is your perspective of the tools and platforms that are used for data ops? And Mike, I'll start with you. You have Data Kitchen and how it has really shaped up data ops space. Speak to that.
Thanks, Rachita. Yeah, I think what we find is that it's a world of choice for companies as they build their data ops capabilities, as it should be. I think all of the people on this call would agree we live in a best of breed world, and there are great new technologies being born every day, whether they're orchestration tools or testing tools or CI/CD tools or data tools. And the fact is that organizations are going to choose the right tool chain for them and the right platform for them. And the key for these organizations is to ensure that whatever data ops strategy they choose, that they can build an optimal data ops process regardless of the tools that they've chosen. And our strategy here at Data Kitchen is to ensure that whether the help that is needed is orchestration or automated testing or automation for CI/CD, that we can offer value regardless of the tool chain. So we see a great mixture of technologies that are being used, and we think that that's just the way of the world, and that we as a vendor, and really those of us in the industry as a whole, need to, I think, understand that and work as best we can to ensure that these organizations that live in a best of breed world can still get the benefit of data ops.
Steve?
Yeah, so I agree, and then I have a slightly different point of view about it. So, I mean, I think the data fabric layer in this ecosystem has so many different tools and technologies that organizations are really struggling to be able to deliver on the promise of automation by then having to add 4 or 5 different or 6 different open source tools or other tools to try to do one for orchestration, another for automation, different ones for testing and observability. And so I think one of the things that some of us try to do in this space is we try to bring a more holistic approach where we're trying to bring a solution to enable organizations and perhaps minimize some of the strain of adding additional point system type tools to solving the data ops problem. And this is what we attempt to do at dataops with dataops.live. So as an example, you could have a situation where a customer is wanting to pick a tool like Terraform or dbt for automation, but then maybe has Airflow for orchestration and wants to leverage dbt core for test or observability, or something like SodaSQL or Monte Carlo. And then you add Git into the mix and other things. And then trying to make that all work together with the data fabric ecosystem can be quite challenging. So, what we try to do is bring those 4 elements of automation, orchestration, test, observability, and the sort of release management and deployment and CI/CD all together so that it can be managed and viewed as one atomic unit. And this is something that we've seen great success with in both large and small enterprise in the speed element, getting customers to go from business requirements to business value in a matter of weeks, versus sometimes them just taking the time to evaluate a bunch of different open source tools, learn them, procure them, and then start to write DDL, can take a half a year, right, or longer to try to get value, right, time, talent, and money. So, this is our, our view and our perspective from, through our lens here at DataOps.
Ajay, do you think there are certain tools and platforms that stand out a lot more in life science and
See,
healthcare?
the reality is that, as I would have to agree with what Michael said, there are so many choices out there. And there is a big assortment of technologies and products. And you have to understand the very nature of life sciences, with every domain operating in its silo, having their own shadow IT, they have kind of procured their own specific tools and their needs. So there's a lot of disparate ecosystem out there. So let's say commercial, for example, in life sciences may be a little more, may go a little more on the edge and go for more niche products, whereas R&D, which is beginning to take its journey into the modernization now, they are not quite mature, and they may think their needs are so basic they don't want to boil the ocean out there. So and here's the interesting part: technologies and products are evolving every day. Even the cloud native ones, the AWS DataOps and AWS DevOps, Azure DevOps, they are also building their ability to orchestrate across to other environments, like cross environments. And and when you talk about a hybrid multi-cloud setup, which by the way is going to be another interesting trend with a lot of our life sciences clients are going to take, I think the need for that agnosticity to be able to seamlessly orchestrate across is it's going to be an interesting challenge for all of us to solve. So the main element here I see is the ability to manage that element of change. Can you keep a seamless orchestrator in the middle? It doesn't matter. One division could take GitHub, one could go to some other code repository, but can they orchestrate through this common kind of a pipeline, or to and have their own pathways for deployment, monitoring, and observability, whatever it is? But can you have that part? Again, I know it sounds very aspirational, but the reality is that every domain in life sciences still needs its autonomy for operating its own level of data and insights, and they may have their own prerogatives. So I think keeping that orchestrator, which can, so we will are more going to be dealing with a hybrid ecosystem, and there will be different tools that every domain might choose to orchestrate with. So I think whoever can be agnostic and seamlessly orchestrate with all these pathways for integration, deployment, observability, monitoring, I think that vendor / product / SI will, I think, definitely be in the forefront.
Costas, what is your take on it?
I agree with everything folks here said. As a professional and user, I think, because software, the way it's delivered and procured these days, okay, the vendors who write software, we say, like, you need to know who you are writing software for. If you don't know who you're writing for no one, right? So customers need to be aware where they are in the journey, okay, and where they want to get in the far future and what is the next step. And they need to find a vendor or a software, okay, that matches their journey, because all the offerings out there are opinionated and they are building for a specific segment, which the user might not be on the same segment. As a professional, I would love to see more open, and I don't mean as open source, because we're in the software business, we need to make money. I mean, like, more as standards. I think choice is a good thing. Too many choices can be a drag, okay? So I would like to see systems and software be able to interoperate with each other.
Great, yeah.
Because the industry is so new and there are so many choices, We haven't gone through the process of consolidation, acquisitions, all those things. So
Great point. Yes, totally agreed. My next question, and probably this is the last question before we wrap up, to both Patrick and Steve. Why should CXOs invest in data ops, and what are the long-term benefits of this investment?
I'm happy to go first or second, Patrick, whatever you prefer. So, you know, from our perspective, I mean, when we're dealing with the CXO and the chief executives that are making these decisions, right? They're all looking for a combination of how do they balance agility and speed with security and governance when delivering these data products, right? They need scale, they need speed to keep up with the demand of business, but they also need to have a well-governed, well-observed, highly secure environment. You know, bringing automation, orchestration, enhanced observability, and being able to lifecycle manage these things are critical, right, to being able to keep up with the demand of business. And that's why I think we're all so busy in this space now. You know, it's really coming to the forefront. You know, I actually got involved with data ops as a design pattern more than 4.5, almost 5 years ago, and it was very much an innovation trigger from Gartner in the really early stages. And I was advising a company that was based in Europe at the time, and at that point, nobody even knew what data ops was. Right? Today, we have organizations that are actually data ops engineering organizations inside of large organizations. So it's becoming a line item, a core focus for many companies. And again, it's like solving any problem, right? Everybody wants to go fast. Everybody wants to find a better, cheaper, more efficient way to be able to get to production, and then to be able to reduce maintenance burden and keep up with the demand of business. And I think that's what we're all trying to do on delivering on the promise of data ops.
Absolutely. Patrick.
Again, I'm not going to disagree with Steve. And the only thing I would add is, you know, as I talk to CIOs and CDOs, their roles have changed, or their focus has changed, where risk management is a big part of the picture. And that's honestly, you know, as Steve would say, or I'm sure Michael would say, that's just the beginning of the benefit you can get from data ops. But it's a pretty good one to go to start from, at least from a catalyst and a seed for growth for this approach and the benefits you're going to get. Again, tying back to having both agility as well as governance, not having to choose one or the other.
Costas, what would you say to your CXO?
I find it's very interesting because when I used to write like pipelines, and probably because the person who was there before me had started like checking how many rows I read from this database and how many rows I loaded. And if this pipeline doesn't match, does it mean that I need to stop everything which is like ahead of it, or it's like I'm okay, I can deal with that problem later? It's I think it's interesting because previously it used to be like the data pipelines and the data business was confided within the data center, right? It was someone's job, okay, who would wake up in the morning and check if the pipeline was okay, and if it was not okay, how to do things. Now, because our sources and our platforms are in the cloud, okay, it has become a software, because it cannot be someone's job anymore. Okay, the boss doesn't really know who to get angry with. Okay, so you need a process, and you, of course, software to map the process and be more informed. So I think, yeah, it is becoming important, and people should care about. And if we are like in industries like finance or telcos or life sciences, okay, there are regulatory requirements, but everywhere is becoming increasingly important, and CFOs and C-level executives should think about that.
Great. Thank you for that pitch. Ajay, as an SI data mod leader, what do you suggest to your C-team customers?
I think it's very important to lay out the whole process end to end for them. You know, from a from a data ops perspective, like I think they definitely needs a little bit of education, but what is important is you cannot, unless you cannot measure your success. I don't think you can really point a finger at Pulse and say how far have I been able to move the needle. So putting those at what we prescribe to our client leadership, the C-suite, is that these are some KPIs that you should be constantly watching on your timeline, and look at moving the needle on all these aspects. Now, yes, tool chains and all, we start something minimum viable, but it's important to have that some level of governance which says that, okay, how much automation am I able to continuously integrate? Am I deploying? How much automation have I brought into the process? I think that KPI is the time to defect resolution and all that other things. Unless you don't put those productivity levers in place, I don't think you're going to be very effective with your data ops initiatives. And that's, but definitely you have to start small and start somewhere. So keeping that those two aspects in mind are extremely critical. So that's what we prescribe.
Great approach. Think big, but start small. Good mantra for the team. Mike, I would like to close this question and answer round with you. You're a part of the C team. What would you tell your colleagues inside and out?
What CXOs tell us, Chitrita, is that their projects just aren't going very well. And their teams who are building these analytic environments and these data science environments are not as productive as the business needs them to be. And for that reason, we recommend adopting data ops principles. And one of the core reasons why these organizations are not as productive as they need to be, as I've said before, is the complexity of the world that they live in. So what we recommend initially is that let's look at the existing environment. Many organizations we talk to already have analytics systems working or in production, but the common thread is many of them are just not working the way that they should. So to your point just a moment ago, and to what AJ said, we recommend sort of starting with a thin thread, looking at a pipeline or two, ensuring the success of that pipeline or two, primarily through the adoption of automated testing and end-to-end observability first, because every pipeline has problems. And sort of solving for that, proving value, and then that can be the springboard to adopting other automation within the data ops environment, automating through development and through code promotion and the other things too. And that's a common pattern that we see for a quick win, value demonstrated early, solving an immediate problem, and that can actually be the foundation needed to implement data ops on more enterprise scale.
Right. Pilot approach works always. We've seen it in many places together as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Great, interesting points that were brought to the table today. It was truly awesome to hear each one of your viewpoints. If time was not an object of limitation, we could have continued talking infinitely on that. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of time. I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for all the energy and passion that you brought to the discussion today. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.